Welcome to this explainer. All right, let's just dive right in. Today, we're not just going to talk about studying hard, we're talking about studying smart. We're literally going to reverse engineer the CompTIA Security SY0-701 exam. Our goal here? To build a mathematically sound study strategy. We'll break down the exact mechanics, the constraints, and the hidden algorithms of the test so you can perfectly align your prep with reality. Here's our blueprint for today. First, mapping your cyber career. Then, decoding the exam mechanics, moving into the domain weight strategy, avoiding avoidable exam losses, and finally, scenario-based study tactics. Section 1. Mapping your cyber career. So you might be wondering, why is passing the SY0-701 so absolutely critical? Well, whether you're currently grinding away as a help desk tech, managing networks, or even if you're starting entirely from scratch as a career changer, this certification is your bridge. It's essentially the main gateway funneling folks from foundational entry-level spots directly into a dedicated cybersecurity analyst or engineer role. That's the why. Now, let's figure out the how. Section 2. Decoding the exam mechanics. Okay, let's decode the hard facts of the exam. Because honestly, understanding these constraints totally dictates your study pace. I mean, you can't win the game if you don't know the rules, right? So the standard US voucher costs $425. That establishes massive stakes right out of the gate. A lot of candidates actually only budget for that first voucher, kind of forgetting the downside of a fail. Failing means buying another attempt completely out of pocket. That price tag makes it absolutely essential that your first attempt is your best attempt. On exam day, you're looking at a strict maximum of 90 questions, and you have exactly 90 minutes. Do the math, and that means you've got an average of just 1 single minute per question to read, comprehend, analyze, and lock in the right answer. Oh, and to pass, you've got to hit a score of 750 on a scale of 100 to 900. There is practically zero margin for error here. But remember that whole 1 minute per question average I just mentioned? Yeah, actually, scratch that. It's a bit of a trap. Which brings us to the most critical mechanical feature of this test. Here's the kicker. CompTIA heavily front-loads the performance-based questions, or PBQs. The hardest, most time-consuming simulation-style tasks usually hit you right at the very beginning before you even see the standard multiple-choice stuff. This completely flips your strategy because these interactive, heavy-lift questions drop while the clock still shows a full 90 minutes. You've got to be ready to jump in and classify, configure, and prioritize right out of the gate. Section 3. The domain weight strategy. This brings us to the core algorithm of the test, the actual domain weights. Get this, there is a massive disparity here. Security operations makes up 28% of the exam, while general security concepts sits way down at 12%. So if you treat every domain as equal, say dedicating the exact same amount of study hours to the 12% chunk as you do the 28% chunk, well, your prep is mathematically misaligned. You'd be totally overweighting the smallest bucket and severely underpreparing for the big one. To study effectively, you literally have to bias your time toward that massive security operations bucket. That means doing deep dives into critical tasks like identifying and remediating vulnerabilities, mastering incident response, and really getting a grip on identity and access management, things like single sign-on and MFA. Plus, alerting, monitoring, and automation use cases. Give these heavy hitters way more room in your schedule and just run shorter review cycles for the general concepts. Section 4. Avoiding avoidable exam losses. Let's patch some vulnerabilities in your approach right now. What mistakes actually create avoidable exam losses? Let's take a look at why candidates who put in the long hours, read all the books, and pay the $425 still end up failing when they sit down for the actual test. The first major trap: memorizing terms without attaching them to a real-world use case. Listen. The exam doesn't care if you can rattle off a flashcard saying SSH operates on port 22. What it does want to know is if you recognize that a blocked port 22 actually explains why a secure Linux admin session is failing, while web traffic on port 443 is still working perfectly fine. It's not about the flashcards, folks. It's about diagnosing a network problem using that knowledge. Another huge trap is mixing up control categories when you're under the stress of the clock. If an incident response question asks for the very next logical step after the identification phase, you have to know the framework cold. The correct answer lives in containment or eradication. You definitely don't want to jump the gun to a lessons learned meeting. Knowing the exact order of operations is an absolute game changer here. And please, whatever you do, avoid this incredibly common error, relying on outdated exam assumptions. Don't use old SYO-601 materials, dead forums, or out-of-date video playlists. The modern SYO-701 objectives demand explicit, updated knowledge of things like cloud security, zero-trust architecture, and automation. If your prep material feels even a little bit anchored in older terminology, verify it against the current objectives right away. Section 5, Scenario-Based Study Tactics. All right, we need to pivot from theory to execution and lock in some scenario-based study tactics that actually work. To survive those brutal performance-based questions at the start of the exam, you've got to shift from passive reading to actively walking through practical distinctions. Basically, you have to convert static facts into kinetic, moving processes. Take public key infrastructure, or PKI, for example. Don't just passively memorize the definition that a certificate authority signs certificates. I promise you, that won't help on a PBQ. Instead, walk through the entire sequence step by step in your head. Start with CSR generation, then CA validation, moving over to certificate presentation, chain validation, and finally the host name and revocation check. If you can walk through that sequence like a story, you can troubleshoot it live on exam day. You should really build a narrative for every single tool and protocol. For cryptography, move past simple little facts like AES is a symmetric algorithm. Instead, attach a full practical sentence to it. Something like, AES is what I would expect for bulk data encryption after a secure key exchange. And do the exact same thing for social engineering. Don't just define phishing. Model the attacker's method, identify the exact log that reveals the attack, and name the specific control that stops it in its tracks. The Security Plus exam heavily rewards practical distinctions. It knows that password spraying and credential stuffing aren't the same thing, and you need to know it too. So take a hard look at your current prep materials right now. Is your study strategy actually going to survive contact with a real SY0-701? Or are you just memorizing definitions for an exam that doesn't even exist anymore?